The rise and fall of Acknor. In the prosperous village of Umwogu, Chief Nangi was once a man of immense wealth and influence. He was revered for his business acumen, having built a thriving trade empire that spanned across many regions. His compound was the largest in the village, a symbol of his status, adorned with gold-trimmed walls and servants who catered to his every need. His only son, Acknor, was born into this life of luxury, never knowing hardship or hunger. From an early age, Acknor was indulged in every possible way. His father spared no expense in providing for him. He had the finest clothes, the best tutors, and the rarest delicacies imported from distant lands. Unlike the other boys in the village who worked on their father's farms or learned a trade, Acknor spent his days playing, boasting about his father's riches, and dreaming of an even grander future. As he grew older, his appetite for extravagance only deepened. He held lavish feasts, spending money carelessly on fine wines, exotic animals, and entertainment. The sons of less fortunate men envied him, while the daughters of the village admired him for his charm and affluence. By the time he reached manhood, Acknor had already married 3 wives, each one chosen for their beauty rather than their virtue. His mother, Nena, watched in silence, her heart heavy with worry. Unlike her husband, who took pride in Ikenga's opulence, she saw the danger in his recklessness. One evening, she called him to her hut, the scent of burning incense heavy in the air. "My son, wealth is like the river," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "It flows abundantly when guided but disappears when wasted. If you do not learn to control your desires, the river will dry up, and you will be left with dust." Acknor laughed, dismissing her words. "Mother, our family is blessed. The gods have smiled upon us. There is nothing to fear." But the gods had other plans. Years later, misfortune struck. A great war disrupted the trade routes, and Chief Nangi's businesses crumbled. His once loyal partners turned away, seizing the opportunity to take over his enterprises. The debts piled up, and the vast wealth he had accumulated vanished in a matter of months. The grand estate that had once been filled with music and laughter became eerily silent, its halls empty. Acknor, so accustomed to abundance, could not comprehend the reality of his situation. He clung to the illusion of his former life, continuing to host feasts even as the food in the storeroom dwindled. But as the riches disappeared, so did his wives, each one finding an excuse to live, unwilling to endure hardship. The final blow came when Chief Nangi fell ill. Without money for a healer, his condition worsened, and within weeks, the once mighty chief passed away. Acknor stood before his father's grave, a broken man. With no inheritance left and no trade skills to rely on, he found himself destitute. In the end, only his mother remained by his side. The grand estate was sold, and Acknor was forced to live in a small mud hut with her. For the first time in his life, he experienced true hunger, true suffering. He had no choice but to work as a laborer, carrying heavy loads in the market for a few copper coins. Those who had once envied him now mocked him, calling him the fallen prince. And so, the son of a great chief became nothing more than a beggar, surviving on the kindness of the very people he once looked down upon. The encounter with the mysterious woman. Ikenga's life had become a relentless cycle of hunger and struggle. After his father's death, he had clung to his mother for support, but even she could not shield him from the cruelty of fate. The years of hardship took their toll on Nena, and one cold morning, she passed away in her sleep. With no wealth, no family, and no home, Acknor was left utterly alone. He wandered the village streets, sleeping under abandoned market stalls, begging for scraps when he could not find work. His fine clothes had long since been replaced with tattered rags, and the once proud son of Chief Nangi had been reduced to nothing more than a market porter, carrying heavy goods for meager wages. One evening, as the market was closing, Acknor sat on a wooden crate, exhausted from the day's labor. His stomach rumbled, but he had earned only a few copper coins, barely enough for a handful of roasted yams. Just as he was about to leave, a voice, soft yet commanding, called out to him. "You there, young man." Aikno turned and saw her. She was unlike any woman he had ever seen. She was tall and strikingly beautiful, with dark, luminous eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of the ancestors. Her skin glowed like polished bronze in the fading sunlight, and her long, braided hair was adorned with tiny golden beads that jingled softly as she moved. She wore a flowing indigo robe embroidered with ancient symbols, and around her neck hung a pendant shaped like a crescent moon. For a moment, Aikno forgot his hunger, forgot his misfortune. He simply stared. The woman smiled, as if amused by his reaction. "I need someone to carry my load to the village boundary," she said, pointing to a bundle wrapped in cloth. At her words, the nearby traders fell silent. Some glanced at each other nervously, while others muttered under their breath. The village boundary was a place of superstition, a desolate path leading into the unknown. Few dared to go there after nightfall. One of the older men stepped forward and shook his head. "Madam, you will not find a potter here willing to go that far. That place, it is cursed." The woman did not reply. She simply looked at Aikno, waiting. He hesitated. Every instinct told him to refuse, to walk away like the others. But something about her presence, her confidence, held him in place. And, perhaps, deep inside, a part of him longed to prove that he was still capable of something. "I will take it," he said finally. The traders gasped, but the woman simply nodded. Aikno lifted the bundle onto his back and followed her through the market. She walked with an elegance that made it seem as though her feet barely touched the ground. As they reached the village boundary, the air around them grew still. The trees swayed gently, though there was no wind. The distant hoot of an owl echoed through the night. Aikno felt a chill run down his spine, but he pressed on. When they finally arrived at a lone baobab tree that marked the edge of the village, the woman stopped. "This is far enough," she said. Aikno set the bundle down, wiping the sweat from his brow. I do not ask for payment," he said, though he was unsure why. The woman smiled, reaching into the folds of her robe. "Even so, you shall have a reward." She extended her hand, revealing a small, glowing crystal ball. It shimmered in the moonlight, reflecting colors that seemed to shift like liquid. Aikno stared at it, confused. "What is this?" "A gift," she said simply. "It will bring you fortune, if you have the wisdom to use it." He hesitated before taking it. The moment his fingers touched the smooth surface, a strange warmth spread through his palm. He looked up to ask what it meant, but the woman was already walking away, her silhouette vanishing into the darkness. Aikno stood there for a long time, staring at the crystal in his hand, unsure whether he had been blessed or cursed. The gift of fortune. That night, Aikno lay in the abandoned hut he had claimed as his own, the crystal ball clutched in his hand. He turned it over in the dim moonlight, mesmerized by the way it shimmered with an otherworldly glow. Was it truly a gift of fortune, or had the woman merely played a trick on him? As he drifted into sleep, strange visions filled his mind. He saw gold spilling from atom pots, vast lands stretching before him, and himself seated in fine robes, surrounded by wealth beyond imagination. A voice, soft and familiar, echoed in his ears. "Guard what you have been given, or all shall be lost again." Aikno jolted awake, his heart pounding. His fingers tightened around the crystal, and for the first time in years, a flicker of hope stirred within him. The next morning, something impossible happened. When Aikno woke, he found a small pile of coins beside him, more money than he had earned in months of labor. He searched the hut, thinking someone had left it by mistake, but there was no sign of anyone. Doubt gnawed at his mind, yet curiosity won. He decided to test the crystal. That day, he walked through the village, speaking with traders, listening for opportunities. To his surprise, everything seemed to shift in his favor. A wealthy merchant suddenly offered him work. An old friend, once distant, welcomed him back and introduced him to powerful allies. Within days, Ikenga's life transformed. With the money that continued appearing in his home, he bought a small piece of land. Within weeks, he had enough to rebuild his father's old business, a trade empire that had once thrived before its collapse. Deals came effortlessly, customers flocked to him, and soon, the name of Chief Nangi's son was spoken with respect once more. But with success came whispers. How did he rise so quickly? The villagers muttered. Could it be spirits? Aikno ignored the rumors, choosing instead to bask in his newfound wealth. He wore the finest clothes, adorned himself with gold rings, and held lavish feasts where he entertained the most influential men in the region. But even in the height of his prosperity, the dreams continued. The mysterious woman would appear, her expression unreadable. Fortune is a fickle thing, she warned. What is given can also be taken. Guard the crystal, and do not let greed blind you. Aikno always woke with a sense of unease, but by morning, the worries faded into the background of luxury and indulgence. He soon grew bolder. If the crystal could summon wealth, why stop at simple trade? He began gambling, placing large bets at games of chance, always winning, always walking away with more than he started. The thrill consumed him, and he became reckless, flaunting his wealth as if it could never run dry. The crystal had made him invincible. Or so he believed. But fortune does not favor the foolish for long. And soon, Aikno would learn the price of greed. The betrayal and greed. Ikenga's wealth had become legendary. His home was the grandest in the village, his feast never-ending, and his arrogance unmatched. Yet, beneath his confident exterior, a dangerous thought consumed him. What if the crystal could give even more? The riches, the status, the admiration, none of it felt enough anymore. He wanted power beyond wealth, influence beyond borders. One evening, he sought out Dibia Okpula, the most feared witch doctor in the region. The old man's hut was hidden deep within the forest, a place few dared to approach. When Aikno arrived, he found the Dibia seated before a fire, his eyes gleaming like embers in the dark. I know why you have come, the old man said without looking up. Aikno hesitated but pressed forward. The crystal, he said. I need more from it. The Dibia chuckled, shaking his head. You are like all men, never satisfied. Do you even know where your fortune comes from? Aikno frowned. He had never questioned it. The crystal simply worked. The Dibia exhaled slowly. The power in that crystal is not yours to control. It was given by a sacred entity, one that can bless or destroy. If you push beyond your limits, you will invite ruin. Aikno scoffed. I am no fool, old man. I did not come here for warnings. I came for knowledge. The Dibia studied him for a long moment before speaking. There is a way, he admitted. A ritual to amplify the crystal's power. But it comes at a terrible price. Aikno leaned forward. Tell me. The fire flickered violently, as if in protest. The ritual demands the life of the one who gifted you the crystal. You must betray her, offer her to the spirits, and the crystal will become limitless. Ikenga's breath caught. The mysterious woman. The one who had changed his fate. For a moment, doubt crept into his mind, but it was quickly crushed by greed. Limitless power. Without another word, he left the Dibia's hut, his mind already plotting. The trap. That night, Aikno stood at the entrance of his home, watching the darkened village. He clutched the crystal tightly, its cool surface pulsing against his palm. He called to the woman in the only way he knew, through desire. Come, He whispered into the night. Come and see what I have built with your gift. As if summoned by the wind, she appeared. The same ethereal beauty. The same piercing gaze. You have done well, Awaken, she said, stepping forward. But your heart is uneasy. Awaken forced a smile. Come inside. Let us talk. She hesitated, sensing something beneath his charm, but followed him into the house. The moment she stepped in, the trap was sprung. Chains, soaked in sacred oils, dropped from the ceiling. Warriors, hidden in the shadows, lunged forward. The woman barely had time to react before they bound her, forcing her to the ground. Awaken towered over her, heart pounding. Forgive me, he muttered. But I need more. She gazed at him, her eyes filled not with anger, but with disappointment. You were warned, Awaken. Her voice was different now, ancient, resonant, inhuman. The ground beneath them trembled. The air turned thick, suffocating. The woman's body began to change. Her skin rippled like water. Her eyes burned like molten gold. And then, her form shattered, replaced by something monstrous. A giant serpent, black as midnight, rose from the floor, its scales gleaming in the flickering torchlight. Gasps filled the room as the warriors scrambled backward, their courage shattered. Awaken fell to his knees, his body frozen in terror. The serpent's voice filled the air, shaking the very walls of his home. You have chosen betrayal over gratitude. You have sought greed over wisdom. The crystal in Awaken's hand cracked, a fine web of fractures spreading across its surface. And then, the serpent lunged. Darkness consumed everything, the wrath of the snake woman. The ground shook violently beneath Awaken's feet, and the air turned thick with an unseen force. The torches in his grand home flickered wildly, casting long, erratic shadows on the walls. The warriors who had helped him set the trap were gone, vanished in the blink of an eye. As if the serpent's very presence had erased them from existence. Awaken was alone with her now. The massive serpent coiled around the room, its scales glistening like black obsidian, its golden eyes burning with unfathomable rage. When it spoke, its voice reverberated through the walls, shaking the very foundation of his house. You were given a gift, Awaken. The serpent's voice was neither fully human nor fully beast, it was something beyond mortal comprehension, something eternal. A chance to rebuild. A chance to learn from your mistakes. And yet, its forked tongue flickered as it lowered its enormous head, bringing its gleaming fangs within inches of Awaken's face. You chose greed over wisdom. Betrayal over gratitude. Awaken tried to crawl backward, but his body refused to move. It was as if the very air around him had grown heavy, pressing him into the ground. He opened his mouth to beg, to plead for forgiveness, but the words wouldn't come. His throat was dry, his breath stolen by fear. Then the serpent spoke the curse. Everything you have touched shall turn to dust. The moment the words were uttered, a powerful wind surged through the room. Awaken's golden goblets, the fine silks adorning his walls, the treasures he had hoarded, all disintegrated before his eyes. His wealth, his empire, was crumbling. The gold in his hands turned to grains of sand, slipping through his fingers. His lands, once lush and fertile, withered into barren wastelands. The grand house he had rebuilt after his downfall, the very walls began to crack and crumble. Awaken let out a choke sob as he watched his legacy fade into nothing. But the curse was not finished. The serpent lifted its massive head once more, its golden eyes narrowing. And you, Awaken, shall suffer the fate of all who betray the divine. Pain shot through Awaken's body, unlike anything he had ever felt. It was as if his very essence was being drained away. His muscles weakened. His bones ached. His skin, once youthful, once full of pride, began to wrinkle and sag. Awaken let out a scream, clutching his face as the transformation overtook him. His once strong hands became frail, his thick hair turned brittle and white, his vision dimmed. The proud, arrogant man who had once ruled with wealth and influence was now a withered husk, aging decades in mere moments. He collapsed to the ground, gasping, reduced to a weak, powerless old man. The witnesses of his doom. The commotion had drawn the entire village. Men, women, and children stood at a distance, watching in horrified silence as the once great Aikno withered before their eyes. The man who had once walked with his head high, who had flaunted his wealth, who had mocked those who had less, was now unrecognizable. Some villagers gasped. Others whispered among themselves. "He looks older than my grandfather. Is this some kind of punishment from the gods? What has he done to deserve this?" And then, just as suddenly as she had arrived, the serpent woman turned to leave. Her massive form shimmered, twisting in the moonlight. And as she slithered toward the village boundary, she spoke one final sentence, her voice carrying through the night. "Let this be a lesson to all, true wealth is not in gold, but in wisdom." With that, she vanished into the darkness, leaving behind only silence. And at the center of the ruined mansion, Aikno lay curled on the cold ground, a broken man, cursed for eternity. A fate worse than death. The once mighty Aikno was now a shadow of a man. His once proud stance was reduced to a hunched, trembling walk. His fine garments had long since turned to rags. His voice, once loud and commanding, now came in feeble whispers, begging for food, for shelter, for mercy. But none would offer it. The villagers, once jealous of his wealth, now avoided him in terror. Some whispered that he was cursed by the gods, that anyone who so much as spoke to him would share his fate. Others saw him as a warning, a walking lesson of what happens to those who betray the divine. Aikno had once walked through the village with gold in his hands, his head held high. Now, he crawled through the dirt, knocking on doors that never opened. When he tried to plead with the village elders, they refused to meet his eyes. When he knelt before the shrine of his ancestors, seeking forgiveness, the wind howled through the trees, but no answer came. When he wandered to the river, hoping to see the mysterious woman again, hoping she would show him mercy, he found only his own reflection in the water, aged, broken, and hollow. Exile at the village boundary. With nowhere left to go, Aikno drifted to the very place where his fate had changed forever, the village boundary. It was there, on a stormy evening, that he collapsed onto the cold earth, exhausted and alone. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating his frail body. The rain poured, soaking him to the bone. And then, as thunder roared in the distance, he saw her. A massive, coiled form shimmered in the darkness, just beyond the trees. Golden eyes watched him from the shadows. The serpent woman had returned. Aikno tried to speak, tried to beg for her forgiveness, but the words caught in his throat. His body was too weak, his soul too broken. The serpent did not move toward him, nor did she retreat. She simply watched. And as the storm raged on, a final realization dawned upon him. She was not here for him. She was here for the village. She had become its silent guardian, ensuring that no one else would ever make the same mistake. Aikno let out one last, shuddering breath as his tired body gave in to the darkness. By morning, he was gone. The legacy of Aikno. The villagers spoke of his fate for generations. They told their children the story of the man who had everything and lost it all to greed. They whispered about the serpent woman, saying that on stormy nights, her golden eyes could still be seen in the darkness, watching over the village, a warning to those who might walk the same path as Aikno. And so, the lesson was passed down. True wealth is not found in gold, but in wisdom. And those who betray the divine will always pay the price. The end.